Hey bosses, it's Marie from Asian Boss. The tensions between China and the US have been on the news quite a lot lately, especially when China recently announced more military drills around Taiwan, as a new US delegation visited the island. So clearly, the two countries have had a complex relationship for a while now. But have you wondered what it's like to actually be part of both cultures and be both Chinese and American by blood? Today we gathered mixed Chinese Americans in China to find out what it was like growing up between the two countries with opposing worldviews. How are they treated by Chinese people, and what do they think of the ongoing US-China tensions from their perspective? Let's go to our Asian Boss reporter in Shanghai to find out.
For starters, could you give us a brief self-introduction?
Okay, sure. My name is Alex. I am Hapa, I'm mixed, so my dad is Caucasian American and my mom is Chinese. And I was born in the US, but I grew up in China ever since I was 6. I attended international schools here, and then I went back to the US for university, and currently I've been working in Shanghai since graduation.
So the American part, I guess, would be Connecticut, and the Chinese part, that'd be my father from Zhejiang, Taizhou. I was doing a lot of teaching and writing, and so now I'm a student again, so I should say I'm studying.
What are you studying?
Well, I'm studying philosophy.
Wow.
In Chicago, I was doing Western philosophy, and now I'm doing Eastern philosophy.
My name is Hans. I've been living here in Shanghai for about 12 years. I've actually lived in China longer than in any country in my life. I was originally born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but we moved around quite a bit. So 8 years ago, I started a debate and public speaking company. So we train students here in Shanghai in English for debating and public speaking.
Well, I'm actually not half Chinese. I'm a quarter. But my name is Laura, and I'm originally from the US. My father is half Chinese, half Honduran, and my mother is white American. I've been here now for 7 years. All have been working in education.
How often do you come across other Harvey like you in China?
Not very often anymore. When I was growing up, because I went to an international school, I think there were more Halfies, but now in my everyday work, most of my clients are Chinese. The expat population of Shanghai, I think, has shrunk, and most Halfies, I think, tend to be expats rather than locals. So a lot have left in the recent years, especially with the recent lockdowns.
So we actually used to have a pretty active group chat here for half Chinese and half American people. I think we still have about 300 members in this WeChat group. So before the lockdown, we still met quite regularly, but since then, we actually haven't met at all.
I can only think of 2 friends that I've met right off the bat who are mixed.
Why do you think it's not common to come across other Harvey or other mixed people here in China?
Well, the decision to move to China is always it's a big one for any person, and when you come from the States, especially in my situation as a second-generation immigrant, you know, my father was the first one born in America. Our grandparents spent a lot of time and money and energy to get to the States, so it's a strange decision to decide to come back. So I think maybe some mixed-race people, our experiences are incredibly complex. And it's hard to say exactly why each of us would decide to come back here. For me, I became interested in the language later in life, so that's why I chose to move here.
Do you identify yourself more Chinese or American?
Yeah, good question. Well, of course, yeah, by percentage of time invested, then of course I'm pretty American. But now it's getting more and more even, because right, as an adult, like as a mature citizen, then it's mostly been in China. So I find myself shifting wherever I am. So back then, maybe just summers, maybe go visit China. Oh, okay, right, I'm Chinese again. Oh, maybe we go eat Chinese food at the Chinese restaurant. Oh, that's right, oh, I'm Chinese as well. Whereas most of the time, right, I'm just me, I'm just Andrew, right?
When I was younger, I definitely saw myself as more American because I was born in the US, I went to an American school. I actually didn't like China when I first moved here, which was in 1996, and so it was a very different place. As I got older, however, I connected a lot more with my Chinese side, especially knowing my mom's side of the family. Like last year, we took a trip to our Laoxiang, so our ancestral home, and I got to meet a lot of that side of the family. So I think as I've gotten older, I become much more proud of my Chinese heritage, and now I think I probably incorporate both sides of the culture in my personality.
I would say that I'm pretty American, yeah. I'm lucky that I've spoken Chinese my whole life, so I've been able to be involved in a lot of Chinese cultural activities, whether I was in America or in China. But I think that I'll always have the accent, and I look different, so I never really blend in here.
You are not blending in here, but do you blend in America more?
Yeah, I would say America is very diverse. So, I always find it really interesting in China, people always ask, where are you from? You look like this, you look like that. But in America, you very rarely get questions like that.
I identify myself as Honduran, Chinese American.
Oh, okay.
All three.
So have you ever experienced identity crisis?
Yeah, huge time, big time identity crisis. Like especially when I was growing up, and I was growing up in a very like white homogenous area. There weren't a lot of people who were mixed race. There weren't a lot of people who are people of color in general, and I didn't learn properly how to speak about how to identify myself until a little later in life, until after I came to China and I became to a better understanding of my own identity.
How do you generally get treated by Chinese people? Do they see you as a fellow Chinese or like a foreigner?
I think they see me as a foreigner. Certainly they see me as a foreigner. When I tell them that I'm mixed, then they'll be like, oh, you're mixed, you're 混血的. But I think on first glance, most people here can certainly tell that I'm not fully Chinese. I think being mixed race in China, especially if you're a Eurasian mix, it's seen as a positive thing. Now, if you were mixed with, let's say, African American or something like that, I don't think it would necessarily be the same. But with my particular mix, I think generally you're treated quite well.
What kind of stereotypes do they have towards Harvey?
2 stereotypes: smart and good looking.
And are you both? Do you think
you can decide for yourself.
Oh, okay.
I've definitely heard that feedback before, that mixed race people are more good looking, they're really beautiful. I think in China, a lot of the beauty standards are actually directed in a more Western direction, which is unusual to me actually. Like people will always compliment me on my nose and how it's like a little bit like the bridge is longer. And that's something that's considered really beautiful in China, but typical Asian features don't have that. And like the eyes too. So a lot of the compliments that I get are very like about specific parts of my face, which is, again, when I first came to China, that was so weird for me.
What's it like getting a job in China? Is it easier or harder because of your mix?
I would say that it's actually extremely advantageous, particularly for someone with my background, because I can speak both languages, but I still look foreign. So it's kind of, you can navigate both worlds really easily. I think for people that have been able to grow up in both cultures and can navigate both cultures, China is actually, it's a really great opportunity for employment.
I've had some job offers just based off of the fact that I look this way, like whether it's acting, modeling, even teaching English. I think people should really ask for certifications, just because it doesn't mean I know exactly what I'm doing. I've done hiring before, and I know at least for English teachers, they don't want people with an Asian face teaching their children. And that's a generalization, yes. But I've heard it time and time again where like at my school, we were previously going to hire a Chinese Canadian guy. Eventually that didn't work out for his own personal reasons. But there was going to be a lot of pushback from the parents. And that was 100% Chinese.
Have you ever felt discriminated against for being half American in China?
Personally, I couldn't say I face anything rising to that kind of level. So definitely from the judicial system or anything like that. But just at a social level, of course, there's a slight difference. So especially when maybe in the international news, there might be some political opportunity to kind of stoke some of the nationalism. So in that case, right, it's very clear. You're from China, you're from America, right? You have to know which team you're playing for.
No, I don't think I've ever felt discriminated in China for being half. I mean, I've definitely faced a few people that have issues with Americans. I think there have been some aggressive people like that before, but I think that's common in most countries. Actually, interestingly enough, I would say that the most discrimination that I've ever faced regarding my race is probably in America. Specifically, when I was in university, I actually used to work for the Asian Student Organization at the University of Colorado, where I went to school. And that was the biggest discrimination I've ever faced because I didn't look Asian enough, or I didn't have an Asian name. And I think that was kind of a big deal for a lot of the Asians that were in that group there, because it was such a big part of their identity, having someone that didn't kind of fit that stereotype was a little difficult for some of them to swallow in the beginning.
I felt discriminated against for being foreign, but I don't know if it's necessarily for being mixed. I've never been called out saying like, you're not Chinese enough or you're not American enough. That hasn't happened.
Okay.
But there have been times, for example, I was with, when I was a student here, my friends and I, we went to go hiking in Huangshan in the Yellow Mountains. Beautiful there. We're waiting in the queue, we're waiting in the line to get up to the cable cars to go up the mountain, because in China you don't actually hike, you go up a cable car. But we're waiting in this line and we're waiting a long time, and at some point one of the guys in my group was having a bit of a discussion with one of the people in line, one of the Chinese people, and we got that kind of go back to your own country line. I felt that, and it's happened in a few other situations too as being a foreigner, but I've never felt it directly because of my mixed race status.
There's only one incident I can remember, which was maybe about a year or two ago, right when COVID started and China locked its borders. At the time, I think there was hostility towards foreigners in general, and because they thought foreigners were bringing in the disease from overseas. And so during that time, I definitely wore a mask. I felt more secure in that, and I was denied entry to buildings a few times by guards who, once they saw a foreign face, they would just say, you can't come in. But beyond that, I don't think I've ever faced discrimination.
The U.S.-China relations has been on the news lately a lot, especially because of Taiwan. Mm-hmm. And given that you're both Chinese and American, and you understand both ideologies, how does it make you feel when you see the news about that they're threatening each other over Taiwan?
I am actually used to it, I would say, because I've lived in China for so long. The China-Taiwan tensions have always been kind of in the backdrop of the last 20 years of history, and occasionally there's flare-ups where China will say something or Taiwan will say something, and so what's happened recently I feel like is just another iteration of that. That said, I do feel like tensions feel a little higher than they do in the past, but at the moment I'm not particularly alarmed.
It's like when you are hanging out with two friends who are dating and you're the third wheel and they start an argument about something that seems like it has nothing really to do with you, yet you would have to stay there and watch it happen. And it's really uncomfortable, right? If you've ever been in that situation, you just kind of like want to shrink into the wall. That's what it feels like. It's like being a third wheel when two people are fighting.
Part of my confusion is that I realize the story that we're given, so in the news and social media, that automatically must be different than the real political situation. So at the high-level government interaction with the diplomats and the military, right, they must be having different conversations, which, right, necessarily you have to keep them separate. And on top of that, all of those stories are sort of reflected between the domestic and the international. So the story that I'm trying to present to my foreign competitors, adversaries, allies, foes, is going to be different than the story I want to present to my people. So of course, to any country, right, you want to show your people, we're being strong, we're protecting you, we're making you great again. And so it's, I guess, kind of an inescapable part of these kind of news, these kind of times. It's hard to differentiate between kind of the public-facing marketing and the actual lived product. But I guess, right, part of that is it's a healthy encouragement. Stay open-minded, stay curious, and just realize there's always more to the story.
I understand Taiwan is a very hot-button issue, obviously from a historical perspective for China, and also from, chips manufacturing for America and China as well. So I'm curious to see how it pans out, but I don't really have too many, inclinations on either side so far.
Do you see any way the two countries can find a common ground?
I don't think so. I don't think there can be a common ground here. It's I think it's just too diametrically opposite. I mean, the reasons that both countries want Taiwan obviously extend far and wide, but the future of the world is an information one, and Taiwan is insanely good at producing semiconductors and microchips. So there's a lot at stake, I think, with Taiwan.
The outside world and Western media often emphasize strict censorship in China, and that people can't talk about certain things. From your experience, how strict would you say the censorship is here?
It's not strict at all. There are certain issues that are sensitive. For example, politics, hot button issues that you typically don't want to talk about. There is surveillance, cameras, and social media. So I think that most foreigners who live here you understand the game. You can talk about certain things. You shouldn't talk about other things. Recreational substances, for example, these are just topics you want to avoid. So yeah, you do have to be careful. Even before I did the interview today, my mom said, make sure you speak responsibly. So
do you think doing an interview is okay, totally okay for you and your family, or do you think it might get you into like a gray zone?
I'm okay with it, but at the same time, I'm very conscious of what I'm saying.
So I would say for myself and the things that I'm interested in, it doesn't affect me very much. But I would say that it has gotten a bit more strict in the past 2 years. Particularly, I think during the lockdown, when everyone was inside, I think it was probably the most emotional I've seen a lot of people in a long time in this country. So during the lockdown, obviously, I think there was a lot of there was rumors being spread that the government was trying to control. So I think that was my first actual experience seeing messages that friends were posting get deleted. But other than that, I would say it doesn't really affect day-to-day life.
I know based off of my Chinese friends who are on Weibo, whenever there's something that happens, there's a lot of censorship and things that you can't search. Like for example, recently there was a live streamer who was totally blocked because on the 4th of June, they held up a cake that looked like a tank, right? And that's not appropriate based off of the date. And whether or not that live streamer knew that, we're not quite sure. But a lot of people were they were Googling what's going on here and they weren't getting any answers, right? So I think that the level of censorship is fairly high in my experience. I also know like foreigners, if we want to get on Google or Instagram, even BBC, occasionally there's new websites added to the blacklist. We have to use a VPN. And officially VPNs are like not legal here. However, you're still able to get them. And whenever there's like a big government meeting or any kind of thing, even recently with the Taiwan situation when Pelosi landed, a lot of VPNs weren't working at that time. There's certain topics you just don't talk about. And even I find if I do talk about them with my girlfriends or any of my Chinese friends, I prefer to do it within someone's home rather than in a public place. I even have a friend who she'll like turn off her phone if there's a sensitive topic going on because she just doesn't want to take any risks. And she's Chinese.
There's also the question, even if there's no explicit censorship, then how much are we sort of being subtly or unconsciously censored? So if there's an algorithm, if Facebook is kind of recommending certain topics, and then it's implanted in my unconscious, I'm thinking more about it, then I'm sort of nudged one way versus another. So I guess, yeah, this is a good chance to think about whether you call it censorship or influence.
As a participant of this dialogue, of this interview, do you think it is quite okay, or do you think we are kind of like in the gray zone?
On YouTube? No, it's fine. Hey, they have all kinds of softcore, nasty Satan worship. It's all right. No worries.
Okay, good. So where do you see yourself settling down in the future?
Well, Shanghai is pretty hard to beat. I had originally thought, well, I'll get some experience, I'll make some connections in China, in Asia. Then, of course, I'll have to go back to New York. That's just the only city, that's the alpha double prime city. I tried it out for a little while. It's actually not what you'd expect. So personally, the convenience, but also just longer term, just think about the opportunities. There's more going on in the East, it turns out. And this seems to be confirmed lately with some of the economic trends.
Probably in the US.
So you're thinking about like maybe moving?
Yeah. I think that a couple reasons. One is I'm a US citizen at the end of the day. Number two is I do think in the last 1 or 2 years, the climate here has become less and less foreigner friendly, and I think a lot of people have sensed that. Mm-hmm. The expat population has shrunk a lot, and the recent Shanghai lockdown, I think, was the last straw for a lot of people. So in the last couple months, we've seen the expat population reduce dramatically. Like I've had a lot of friends who have left or are leaving. So I think, China's very different now than it was before, and I think that in terms of a pros and cons list for foreigners living here, I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that the pros are dwindling and the cons are growing, or just the balance is not in favor of staying in China. But that's my personal viewpoint.
My new job, I signed a contract for 2 years, and I plan to finish that for sure. But after that, it just depends on what the COVID policies are, because recently with the government, the rules surrounding COVID are really, really strict, and it's gotten to a point where it's making it difficult. In the past, I could see my family twice a year. I saw them for the first time in 2 years just a few months ago, which was like, that's such a long time. So if the policies loosen and life here becomes a little bit more easy in relation to COVID, then I could see myself staying a bit longer. I really like living in China. Teaching here is a really rewarding experience. The students are amazing. There's plenty of positive things I could say about living here, but it really just depends on what kind of choices the government makes in the direction of COVID.
I think the biggest challenge for me moving forwards is children's education. Obviously there are a lot of really high quality schools in Shanghai, but I think the kind of environment, the pace of life, the pressure that students are under, as well as the cost of schooling and even activities outside of schooling, make it a difficult place to commit and say, this is 100% where I want to be. Outside of that though, I absolutely love it. I think the food scene here is the best in any city, in any country that I've ever been to. It's absolutely amazing. I would say the friends that I've made here are incredible, super diverse, tons of talent, interests in all sorts of different areas. But the biggest challenge for me, obviously, as a parent of 2 daughters now, is thinking in the next 6 to 10 years where I want them to be growing up. And so that's kind of the big question mark.
What's the one thing that you wish people in the US knew about when it comes to China that they don't hear about in the mainstream media?
Okay, so the first thing is that in the mainstream media, usually they're talking about political or diplomatic affairs, but that doesn't represent the views of your everyday Chinese person, which is, in my experience, very welcoming, very open-minded, very tolerant. Maybe a tiny bit less so in recent years, but I think by and large, still what you'd expect out of, I think, just like a normal person, right? So what you're reading about in the news has very little to do with how everyday people think or how they view the US. If you're reading Western mainstream media, one thing that can get left out is, I think, of how proud Chinese people are of being Chinese, especially recently, because the Western media will tend to emphasize things like human rights abuses or, draconian policies or the lockdown, and these things certainly happen, but it's not like people here are entirely resentful of the government, or not to the degree you nearly think, even though there is some criticism. I think most people here are incredibly proud of what China has done over the last 20, 30 years. Their families have been lifted out of poverty. The way kids live today would be unthinkable in their grandparents' generation in terms of material comfort and security. So I think that just gets left out of the conversation, or is just a point to be aware of, I think, when talking to Chinese people about issues in China. Is you can't just assume that. I think maybe sometimes Westerners maybe think that their form of living or democracy, everybody must admire that, or it's viewed as the paragon of civilization, but that actually isn't the case at all. So it's just a cultural point to be aware of.
China as a place is very different than the perception that is painted on US TV. I would say that most Chinese people are definitely more conservative in certain ways, but really open and very curious. So living in China has really exposed me to a lot of great things, not only just the people and the food and all that kind of stuff, but also music and art, really, really fun things that I don't think a lot of people ever really see in the US.
Chinese people are incredibly friendly. They're so welcoming and kind. I've met such kind-hearted people here, and I know that in the US, China as a country is painted as kind of like this big bad, in a lot of different ways. And I wish that people could get to know the people more, because the people don't reflect, like the government and their choices doesn't reflect the people. I don't think that that's true. And even in my own country, you can say a lot about the American government and all of the bad things that have happened there, and the good things. But that doesn't reflect in the people and your day-to-day interactions, because the day-to-day interactions here and life here is so much more simple, so much more lovely than I think the average American realizes.
Okay. Thank you very much for today.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Yeah.